Old Tucson, Arizona, July 1958, the set of Rio Bravo. They called John Wayne the fastest draw in Hollywood westerns, and nobody questioned it. The Duke had been perfecting his draw for 20 years across dozens of films. His technique was legendary, practiced, powerful, intimidating. But on this scorching afternoon, on this dusty set, Wayne was about to discover something that would shake his understanding of what it meant to be fast. Dean Martin was leaning against a hitching post, watching. He had a martini glass in one hand, God knows where he'd gotten it on this desert set, and a cigarette in the other. He looked like he'd just wandered out of a Vegas lounge and accidentally ended up in the Old West. His costume was perfect, his hair was perfect. But there was something about Dean that made it all look accidental, like he'd thrown on a cowboy outfit as a joke and somehow looked better than everyone who'd spent 2 hours in wardrobe. Howard Hawks, the director, was setting up a scene where Wayne's character, Sheriff John T. Chance, would face down 3 gunmen outside the saloon. It was meant to be the film's signature moment, Wayne's character drawing his Colt .45 faster than humanly possible, taking down the threat before anyone could blink. "All right, Duke," Hawks called out. "Let's see the draw one more time before we roll. I want to make sure the camera catches every second of it." Wayne nodded, his face serious. He positioned himself exactly as he'd done 100 times before, feet shoulder-width apart, right hand hovering near his holster, body coiled like a spring, ready to release. The set went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hawks counted down. 3, 2, 1. Wayne's hand moved. It was fast, impossibly fast. His palm hit the grip, the gun cleared leather, rose in a smooth arc, and his thumb cocked the hammer, all in one fluid motion that took less than half a second. The blank round cracked like lightning, echoing across the desert. The crew erupted in applause. "Beautiful, Duke," Hawks said, grinning. "That's the fastest I've seen you do it." Wayne holstered the gun, allowing himself a small smile. 20 years of practice, Howard. 20 years. Dean Martin took a long sip of his martini. "That's real fast, pal," his voice carrying that lazy, amused quality that made everything sound like the setup to a joke. Wayne turned to look at him. "You think you could do better, Martin?" It wasn't said with hostility. There was respect there. Wayne had been skeptical when Hawks first suggested casting Dean Martin, a singer, a comedian, in a serious western alongside him. But Dean had surprised him. The man could act. He understood stillness, presence, the weight of a scene. And more importantly, he didn't try too hard. There was something authentic about Dean's performance that Wayne recognized, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Dean shrugged, that signature half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I don't know, Duke. I've never tried." "Never tried?" Wayne laughed. "We've been shooting this picture for 3 weeks. You're wearing a gun every day." "Yeah, but I haven't actually drawn it," Dean said. "I figured the prop guy does that for the close-ups." The crew laughed. It was exactly the kind of thing Dean Martin would say, simultaneously self-deprecating and supremely confident, like he didn't care enough to try, but knew he'd be good at it if he did. Hawks, sensing an opportunity for either great entertainment or complete disaster, jumped in. "Well, Dean, what do you say? Want to give it a shot? No pun intended." Dean looked down at his martini glass as if considering whether participating in this would require him to put his drink down. That alone was apparently a significant sacrifice. "Sure," Dean said. "Why not?" He drained the last of his martini, handed the empty glass to a nearby grip, and walked toward the mark where Wayne had been standing. His movements were unhurried, almost lazy. He took his position with none of Wayne's coiled intensity, just Dean Martin standing there, looking like he was waiting for a bus. "You want me to count you down?" Hawks asked. "Nah," Dean said, pulling out another cigarette and lighting it. "I'll just do it when I feel like it." Wayne exchanged a glance with Hawks. This was either going to be embarrassing or something else entirely. Dean took a long drag from his cigarette, let the smoke drift lazily from his mouth, and then, without any warning, without any preparation, without any of the coiled tension that Wayne had employed, his hand moved. It wasn't just fast, it was impossibly fast. His palm appeared in his hand, as if by magic, rose smoothly, and the blank fired before anyone even registered that he'd started the draw. The whole motion was so relaxed, so effortless, that it looked like Dean had simply reached into his pocket for his lighter and accidentally fired a gun instead. The set went completely silent. Not the respectful silence of people watching a master craftsman, the stunned silence of people witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. Dean casually holstered the gun, took another drag from his cigarette, and looked at Hawks. Was that okay? I wasn't really paying attention. Hawks's mouth was hanging open. Dean, that was... How did you... Wayne was staring at Dean like he'd just walked through a wall. Martin, where the hell did you learn to draw like that? Dean shrugged. I didn't learn it, pal. I just did it. That's not possible, Wayne said, but there was no anger in his voice, just genuine confusion. That kind of speed takes years of practice, muscle memory, repetition.
Maybe for some people, Dean said. I don't know. I just figured it's like dealing cards, right? You just let your hand do what it wants to do. Act 1. Understanding the players. To understand why this moment left John Wayne speechless, you need to understand who these two men were in 1958. John Wayne was 51 years old and the biggest star in Hollywood. He'd made over 100 films. He'd defined what a cowboy looked like, how a hero moved, what masculinity meant on screen. Wayne's method was discipline. Every aspect of his performance was calculated, practiced, perfected. His walk, his voice, his draw. Especially his draw. Wayne had worked with quick-draw experts for 2 decades. He'd practiced thousands of hours. He could clear leather in 0.4 seconds, faster than most real gunslingers from the Old West. It was a point of pride. The Duke was the fastest gun in Hollywood, and everyone knew it. Dean Martin was 41 years old and in the middle of reinventing himself. He'd split from Jerry Lewis the year before. Everyone said he'd disappear without his partner. They were wrong. Dean was hotter than ever. His recording career was exploding. His nightclub act was legendary. And now Howard Hawks had cast him in Rio Bravo, opposite John Wayne. It was a gamble. Dean was a singer, a comedian. What did he know about westerns? But Hawks saw something in Dean, a natural authenticity that couldn't be taught, a stillness that drew the camera to him. And Dean's approach to acting was the exact opposite of Wayne's. Dean didn't prepare, he didn't rehearse, he showed up, hit his marks, and went home. People thought he was lazy. People were wrong. Dean's effortlessness was its own kind of genius. He just made it look accidental. Act 2. The moment that changed everything. The cinematographer, Russell Harlan, spoke up. Mr. Hawks, I was running the camera for a test shot. I caught it. Play it back, Hawks said immediately. They crowded around the camera as Harlan rewound the film and played it through the viewer. There it was, frame by frame. Dean Martin's draw. And it was fast. Faster than Wayne's. Not by much, but definitely faster. And what was even more remarkable was how effortless it looked. Wayne's draw was all power and precision. Dean's was smooth, like water flowing downhill. Son of a... Wayne muttered, but he was smiling. Son of a bitch, Martin, you've been holding out on us. Not really, I just never thought about it before. You guys made it seem like such a big deal, I figured I'd see what all the fuss was about. Ricky Nelson, the young singer who was also in the film, spoke up. "Mr. Martin, have you ever drawn a gun before today?" "Sure, in the Navy. Had to qualify with a sidearm. But that was, 15 years ago? I barely remember it." "And you never practiced quick draw?" Hawks asked. "Why would I?" Dean looked genuinely confused by the question. "I'm a singer, Howard. I practice singing." Walter Brennan, the veteran character actor playing Stumpy, started laughing, a wheezing, delighted sound. "Duke, I think you just got shown up by a crooner." Wayne shook his head, still smiling. "No, Walter, I got shown up by Dean Martin. There's a difference." He walked over to Dean and extended his hand. "That was the damnedest thing I've ever seen." Dean shook his hand. "Thanks, pal, but don't worry. I'm not trying to take your fastest gun title. Way too much pressure. I'd have to practice and everything." "You know what the crazy thing is?" Wayne said. "You don't even care, do you? You just did something I've spent 20 years perfecting, and you're already thinking about your next drink." "Well," Dean said, glancing around, "somebody did take my martini glass." The set erupted in laughter. Act 3. The Deeper Understanding. Hawks, always the artist, saw something deeper in what had just happened. "Duke, Dean, I want both of you in the next setup. We're changing the scene. Instead of you facing down 3 gunmen alone, I want Dean's character there with you. We're going to shoot a moment where the 2 of you draw together. The audience needs to see this dynamic." "What dynamic?" Dean asked. "The contrast," Hawks said. "Duke's all coiled power and intensity. You're all relaxed elegance. Together, it's going to be dynamite." They shot the new scene an hour later. Wayne and Dean standing side by side in front of the saloon, facing down a group of hired guns. Hawks counted down, and on his mark, both men drew. Wayne's draw was exactly what it had always been: fast, powerful, intimidating. Dean's draw was something else entirely: smooth, effortless, almost lazy. Together, they created a visual metaphor for 2 different kinds of masculinity, 2 different approaches to strength. Wayne was the warrior. Dean was the man who didn't need to try. When Hawks called cut, he was grinning like a kid on Christmas. "That's it. That's the scene. We're keeping both takes." Over the next few days, word spread throughout old Tucson about what had happened. Cast and crew members who hadn't been there for the original moment started showing up to watch.
Whenever Dean and Wayne had scenes together, hoping to catch another glimpse of Dean's impossibly casual quick draw, Wayne, to his credit, never showed any jealousy or resentment. If anything, he seemed fascinated by Dean. One evening after shooting wrapped, Wayne found Dean sitting on the porch of his trailer, guitar in hand, working out a melody. "Mind if I join you?" Wayne asked. "Your porch too, Duke." Wayne settled into a chair, lit a cigarette, and watched Dean play for a minute before speaking. "I've been thinking about what happened the other day with the draw." "Still mad about it?" Dean asked, though his tone made it clear he knew Wayne wasn't. "No, I'm trying to figure out how you did it." "I told you, pal. I just did it." "But that's what I don't understand," Wayne said. "Everything I know about shooting, about acting, about life, it comes from discipline, from practice, from doing something over and over until you get it right. But you just show up and it works." Dean stopped playing and looked at Wayne, really looked at him, without the usual layer of amusement that he wore like armor. "You want to know the truth, Duke?" "Yeah, I do. The reason I make it look easy is because I don't let it be hard." Wayne frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't overthink things," Dean said. "You spend 20 years practicing your draw, thinking about every little movement, every fraction of a second. By the time you actually do it, you're carrying 20 years of expectations, 20 years of what if I mess up. I just pick up the gun and pull the trigger. No history, no pressure, no fear." "So you're saying ignorance is an advantage?" No, Dean said. I'm saying freedom is an advantage. You care too much, Duke. And that's not a criticism. It's what makes you great at what you do. But it also weighs you down. Me? I don't care enough to be weighed down. Wayne sat with that for a long moment. You really don't care about being the fastest draw in Hollywood? Dean smiled. Not even a little bit, pal. I care about singing a good song, making people laugh, playing a decent round of golf. But fastest draw? He shook his head. That's your dream, not mine. I'm just visiting. And that was when Wayne understood. Dean Martin's superpower wasn't that he was naturally fast or talented or gifted. His superpower was that he didn't need to be the best at anything. He was so secure in who he was that he could be effortlessly excellent at things other people spent their lives mastering, simply because he didn't burden himself with the weight of excellence. You know what, Martin? Wayne said. I think I like you. Most people do, Duke. It's a curse. They both laughed. Act 5. The Legacy. Rio Bravo wrapped a few weeks later. The film would go on to become one of the greatest westerns ever made, and the chemistry between Wayne and Dean Martin would be cited as one of its key strengths. Critics would write about the fascinating contrast between Wayne's intense masculine presence and Dean's cool, unflappable charm. But nobody outside that set ever knew about the quick-draw moment. It became one of those Hollywood legends that old-timers would tell, usually after a few drinks, about the day Dean Martin outdrew John Wayne without even trying. Hawks wanted to film it again, to capture it properly, to make it a moment in the movie, but Dean refused. Once was funny, Howard. Twice is showing off. Years later, long after both men were gone, Ricky Nelson would tell the story in an interview. He'd be asked about working with Dean Martin on Rio Bravo, and he'd smile that same smile he had when he watched it happen live. Dean Martin, Ricky would say, was the only person I ever met who could be the best at something and not care. And that not caring, that made him better than everyone who did. The interviewer would ask if the story was true, if Dean really outdrew John Wayne, and Ricky would just smile. Let me put it this way, he'd say. Duke spent 20 years learning to be fast. Dean spent 20 years learning not to try. And on that one day, in that one moment, not trying was faster. Epilogue. The lesson. That was Dean Martin, the man who could beat John Wayne in a quick-draw contest and then immediately forget about it because he had a golf game the next morning. The man who made impossible look accidental. The man who proved that sometimes the secret to being unforgettable isn't caring more, it's caring less. Wayne learned something that day on the set of Rio Bravo, something he'd spent 20 years of discipline and practice never understanding. Excellence doesn't always come from trying harder. Sometimes it comes from not trying at all. From being so comfortable in your own skin that you can do anything without the weight of expectation crushing you. Dean Martin never needed to be the fastest draw in Hollywood. He just needed to be Dean Martin. And on that scorching July afternoon in 1958, that was more than enough to leave the Duke speechless.